name is Casper. Lately I've been doing a lot of experiments using the Teletype from Monome to make some generative ambient music in this little Intellijel palette case. I'm really enjoying using the Teletype. It's so much fun, but I am finding that some of the documentation, especially for the newer functionality, is a little bit out of date. So I thought might as well make a little video showcasing some of the things that I've learned by reading through the source code for the latest releases. In this specific video, we're going to be using some operands that were added in the 3.2.0 release. So make sure that if you're trying to do any of this, that you've updated your Teletype. There's a pretty easy to follow manual on how to do that on the Monome website. Just a quick run through of how I've set up my little case here. The Teletype has 3 different triggers here wired up. The 2 first go to an envelope that control VCA. And that VCA is hooked up to 2 different outputs from this little oscillator module. This is from After Later Audio, and like many other oscillators, it spits out different waveforms at the same time. So I'm taking advantage of that here by having the sine go into one end of the VCA and the saw go into, well, actually the saw goes into filter and then into the VCA. What that means is that I can trigger these 2 envelopes separately to get either a sine out or get a saw out. And I have set the envelopes up so that one of them gives me a long slow tone and the other gives me a faster, more plucky tone. So that just gives me some flexibility even though I only have 1 oscillator there. And then I have the Plonk module from Intellijel here that's wired up to the 4th pulse trigger. And I use that for mostly like rhythmic sound and stuff like that. Right now I've just set it up to a marimba sound. All of this feeds into a small mixer, also from Intellijel, and that feeds into the Make Noise Mimeophone that just gives me a little bit of reverb and delay to make everything a little richer. Finally, all that is fed out. I'm recording this through a small portable Tascam digital recorder. But let's try to quickly fire off these 3 outputs just to get a sense of what they sound like. So let me set a voltage for the oscillator here first. So this is CVA, and we'll just set that to N24. So let's just quickly set that out and then send a pulse to the very first trigger. That gives us that little plucky sound I was talking about. And then we can try the next one, which is same oscillator but just different waveform and through the filter. And you can hear like a much smoother envelope there. So having those 2 together just really gives a lot of flexibility. Let's try to send the same voltage out to the Plonk. Let me just see. I forget. Right. So that is the 4th one. So that would be D, CVD. We'll set that to the same, and then we will trigger the 4th trigger output. And there we go. Beautiful little marimba sound. Let's quickly talk about how values in the Teletype turn into semitones in the oscillators. So basically when I set the CV output to a value, so let's set the first one here to 5000, that gets translated out on some range that the output is mapped to. But the number 5000 doesn't mean anything. There is a table of voltages, so we can do CVA, V, and then do 3. That will set it to 3 volts, 2 will set it to 2 volts, etc. That's super useful if you are driving anything specifically from a voltage perspective. Your rack is, I believe, between 0 and 10 volts, so that's a very useful range. However, we don't think about volts when we think about scales and semitones. In your rack, things are set up to have 1 volt per octave. So every octave is divided into 12 steps. And so if you divide 1 volt by 12, you'll get the steps you need to accurately give a specific semitone. The problem is that thinking about 3.725 volts or something like that is not very useful, and it doesn't really mesh with thinking about music in terms of scales and semitones. So the first function that's been here, I believe, since the first releases of Teletype is an operand called N, and it basically looks up voltages in a table. So let's try using N here. Set this to 0, and then send out trigger. Actually, let's do the second one here. And so in my case, I've tuned my oscillator to C, so N0 should be a C going out of there. Actually, let's just combine this and make it a little more readable. So I'll add a semicolon to add a separate set of commands. And then we'll do the same thing here. So now I'm just setting the voltage value of CVA and then triggering pulse 2. And we get exactly the same thing as the last time. And so now N looks up in this table that has semitones mapped to voltages. So if we want to go an octave up, there's 12 semitones between that. So if I go 12 now, that should give me the next. And if we add 12 to that and go to 24, we go an octave up again. And 36. So that's pretty useful. However, most of the time you don't want to play freely within any semitone at all. You want to constrain yourself to a specific scale. And so we could easily calculate and say, okay, well, 24, that's gotta be a C. So if I wanted my next tone to be, let's say, an E, we'd have to go, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones up. So I would add 4 to this, and I should now get an E. So we can do that, and it's not impossible, but it's a little tedious, and it makes it hard to do interesting math that runs through a scale, for example. It does an arpeggio without having to either create your own lookup tables or enter hard-coded values or something like that. So in the 3.2 firmware, we got a new set of operands that helps us with that. And they're basically just small changes to N that lets us look up based on Western scales. So the first one, just looking at the documentation over here, is N.S. So that looks up in the N table just like before, but instead of giving it just one value that's a lookup into the whole table, we give it 3 different operands. And so in the documentation, you'll just find these referenced as R, S, and D. I kind of figured that I knew what they were, but I wanted to go look up in the source code, and there's actually a lot better documentation in the source code than in the actual documentation. So the first one, R, is the root node. So if we give it the 24 as before, that means it's a C, and we'll start out from the C at that position, so 2 octaves up. And then the next one is the scale, and there's a lookup table that you can look up in the documentation. It's basically a value between 0 and 8, and it goes through major, natural minor, harmonic minor, melodic minor, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, and Locrian. And so let's pick the harmonic minor here. That's a 2, and then the final value is the degree. And so this is a value between 0 and 6, and so that gives us 7 different values because 0 is included as a value. And so in the scale of C, that would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And so if we set this to 0, we should just get the root node out. So let's try that. And then if we wanted to do something musically, we might want to switch to the third and the fifth. And so that would be, in this case, since we're starting at 0, that would be 2, this would be the third. And then 4 would be the fifth. And so now we should have a regular tritone here from the melodic minor scale with C as the root. So if I fire these off pretty quickly after each other, we just maybe add a little bit of reverb and a little bit additional repeats from the Mimeophone, then we should be able to hear the harmony of those 3 tones together. So start out with 0 again here. Pretty beautiful, isn't it? So now we can suddenly do a lookup table that uses these to run through. And so instead of having a lookup table that is specific lookups into the end table, so you might see a lookup table that's something like 11, 19, 12, 5, specific lookups that fit within a scale. Now we can simply constrain ourselves between this, so we can have a pattern that has values between 0 and 6, and we'll know that those are within that scale. And we can even do it in a way where we can kind of think about it as like, I want to add a third, fifth, then I want to wait a little bit, then we're at a 7th, and then maybe we want to do things like add a 4th or 2nd or 6th. We can suddenly do that in a way where we can look at that table easily and see whether or not we are adding in a way that will be dissonant or in a way that will do interesting harmonic changes. So maybe let's do just a little experiment and add some values to one of the patterns and run through it like that. So let's go in here, and so let's start out with just what we just had, which is just a regular triad. And then let's go add this to the metronome script just to make it easy. We'll use the command from before, but let's first set up the metronome script to hit maybe every, say, 3 seconds. And we'll activate it. And so if we jump into it now, let's see if I have this in the buffer still. There we go. All right. And then what we really wanted here was pn.next one. Oh, now it's getting too long. Gotta split this up. So alright, so now we have that triad kind of playing. Let me just slow it down a little bit. Actually, let's do something else. Let's move this. Let me just delete that line. And instead we'll say 2 script 1, and then we'll go dump this in here. All right, so now we should have the same, but only called at a much slower rate. So metronome a little faster. And then let's add a little bit more here. Add the root, and let's add the 7th, and then maybe the jump down to the 2nd, and wait, that's not the 2nd. Forget this is zero indexed. There we go. That's the 2nd. Up to the 5th, and then down to the root again. So now we're suddenly like doing something interesting within a scale with very little work, and where we can think about it from a sense of harmony and Western scales instead of from magic numbers or having to count our way through scales to enter things in here. Let's add something. So let's use the marimba to add some accents here. So we'll do the same thing here. Oh. Let's go straight up for the 7th. So now we have a separate pattern here of one less than the other one. So the other one is 8 steps long, this one is 7 steps long. So if we have these two running against each other, they're gonna be looping in a way that creates phasing, where it's gonna be a little bit different every single time it loops, which makes it a little more interesting. So let's see. Alright. Let's find the metronome, and so I guess we could do it at the same time, maybe just to make it easy to begin with. So now we're firing off both scripts, every other hit here. Let's go look at the first script here. We just copy this line. The second one, we want to do next pattern here, and we want to send this to the Plonk. So this is gonna be D instead here, CVD. Right, so now we're sending this pitch to the Plonk. So let's send a pulse to the Plonk as well. Let's go look at the pattern table here. So we can see that they're moving at the same time, but every time they look through, they're gonna get a little bit out of sync. No, not out of sync. Every time they loop through, they're gonna be phasing a little bit. Let's see here. There we go. So as before, they were 1 step off, now they're gonna be 2 steps off. Let's try doubling up the speed of the marimba. Let's just go to the metronome script. So we want to fire this off every time. Let's go look at the tracker to see what this looks like. I hope this was useful. I think I want to try to keep this short, but I'll do some other ones soon with lots of other little tips and tricks. At least I hope this explained what the new N.S command or N.S operand does and how you use it. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch more of these videos as I produce them, please remember to click subscribe. Greatly appreciate a like as well. Yeah, thanks for watching.